Welcome to Caregiver Chats. I'm Dr. Lakelyn. Today we're covering the last topic in our three-part series about caregiving relationships with a discussion about caring for a non-immediate family member. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. Caregiver Chats is a podcast designed to help those caring for older adults find balance, support, resources, and encouragement. If you're caring for an aging family member or friend, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Dr. Lakelyn. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Home Instead, an honor company. I know how busy caregivers are, and I'm so grateful you're taking the time to listen. Last episode, I talked with Laurel Whitman from WellSpouse about the unique aspects of caring for a spouse. If you find yourself in that type of caregiving situation, I would strongly encourage you to go back and give our conversation a listen. It was wonderful. Today, I'm really looking forward to diving into the last topic in our three-part series on caregiving relationships, and we're going to cover non-immediate relative caregiving relationships. And you might be thinking, okay, who are you talking about? Well, these are people who find themselves caring for someone who is an aunt, uncle, cousin, sibling, grandparent, or maybe someone who's not a relative, like a neighbor or a friend. And if we do a quick refresher on the data, we know that of those caring for a relative, about half are caring for a parent or an in-law, 11% are caring for a spouse or partner, 5% are caring for a sibling or an in-law, sibling-in-law, and 1% are caring for an adult child. And then there's the category that's kind of called other relatives. So 5% of people are caring for other relatives. And then beyond that, those that are caring for maybe a neighbor or a friend, people that aren't even related to them, we're seeing about 11% of caregivers fall into that category. So the caregiving journey, again, can be so diverse and look so different. So if you find yourself caring for someone who's not an immediate relative, it can present a variety of challenges. And I'm really looking forward to talking more about these relationship dynamics with my fellow gerontologist, April Ibarra. April and I have had the pleasure of working together over the years, and I love her experience in the field. She has over 25 years of experience in healthcare and aging. She has a master's in gerontology, and her career has been dedicated to improving the lives of older adults by advocating, educating, and delivering solutions to help them live their highest quality of life. April started her career in aging by teaching exercise programs for residents in nursing homes and continues to encourage exercise as a tool to age well. April's career has been spent in many areas of healthcare, including hospitals, rehabilitation, senior living, and home care. April is also a certified senior advisor, and she is a passionate champion for older adults and those that care for them. She's also been a caregiver herself for several of her relatives. You can learn more about April on her website, Aging with April. We have linked to it in our show notes. I'm so excited for April to share more about her caregiving experience with us today. Welcome, April.
Hello, Lakelyn. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Oh, the pleasure is...
I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. The pleasure's all mine. I'm looking forward to it as well. As I stated in your intro, you have cared for a variety of people, older family members, friends throughout your life, and are currently supporting your aunt. So I would love for you to just tell us more about your caregiving experience before we dive into today's topic.
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, I always have tales of Aunt Joy. I have many aunts, but I have one aunt here locally, and that is Aunt Joy. And, she practically raised me as a young person. And now that she's aging, and certainly I think anytime you're passionate about aging, people always want to hear what you have to say. You're constantly being looped in to support others. But I feel very strongly about supporting Aunt Joy for many reasons, because I just look at her as I would look at myself as I was aging. And because I'm not so immediately involved, she's not my mother, she doesn't live with me, I'm not responsible for day-to-day caring for her. I'm just trying to guide her through the aging experience so that she is happy and she is safe And it's a whole different spin on it, and I enjoy it immensely.
That's really neat that you can, since you're local, you can be there for her and encourage her. And especially since she has, it sounds like, done a lot for you over your life and has been an important part of your life. And so I just appreciate you sharing that and sharing a little bit about how you care for her.
Yeah. And, she's going to be 80 this year. So, and that's some longevity for our family. So we're like, yay, somebody's making it to 80. Because I lost my parents much earlier. I've lost grandparents. So I only have a few remaining aunts and uncles left. And during these last couple of years, I've watched her health change. I've watched her life decline a little bit due to some things that have happened to her. And certainly, it kind of fires me up a little bit to see some of her experiences that have been detrimental, especially as she's transitioned not so successfully through some health challenges. As a matter of fact, last year at this time, she had been in and out of hospitals for about 3 months. It had several different rehabilitation stays. And quite frankly, on Memorial Day weekend last year, she was placed in a geriatric psych unit simply because nobody really knew quite what to do because she was so overwhelmed by the experiences she was having. She had a UTI, which just led to delirium and lots of things that people just didn't know what to do with. And when she expressed concerns for going home and being alone and kind of refused to go home, they put her in a psych unit, which was a big mistake. And so to guide her through some of that, not as somebody who's professionally caring or personally responsible for getting her home and taking care of her meals and things, but for somebody who's trying to get her to live her best life and help her. It's a huge opportunity to speak openly with her about what happened. It was traumatic.
It sounds like it. That is quite a lot to have to go through. And we're going to be talking more about kind of the unique dynamics of caring for a non-immediate relative and some of the challenges. But, to care for someone who, as you said, maybe you don't have, direct, I don't want to say oversight of, but you're not the day-to-day caregiver, but you want to be that supportive person. That does create some interesting and unique dynamics and challenges. And so,
because, she is now cognitive. At the time, it was the delirium from the UTI. So it was like a very quick transition between a very capable older woman living on her own. She's been divorced. She does have a son who lives close by. But of course, he's sort of the primary caregiver. So that's where the dance happens, right? I don't want to step on his toes and I don't want to step on her toes, but I want to help navigate and guide them through some of the things that they're experiencing so that she gets the best outcomes. Because quite frankly, I'm very particular, and I do feel like I encourage that aging adults have the right to make their own decisions and live their own lives. All we can do is guide and direct and consult them. And sometimes we have to give them news they don't want to hear. We have to tell them maybe things that, okay, if you do this, this is going to happen. And are you ready for that consequence? But sort of it's freeing when you're not the direct caregiver because you can guide them without forcing them to do something. You're instead just trying to be the best advocate you can.
Yeah. Well, and I know that some people who are caring for a non-immediate relative, they might be in a similar situation to you where they're not maybe the primary caregiver, but they're in that supporting role, maybe considered a secondary caregiver. But then there are some who do step into that kind of full-on primary caregiving role for a non-immediate relative. And I'm sure that comes with some unique challenges. And I'd really love to talk through some of those, maybe some that you're experiencing. And then, from your and I's collective experience, we talk to caregivers regularly about some of these dynamics and what we've kind of observed and come to learn, because, it's a different dynamic for a lot of folks. And there's a lot of things to consider. So, if you're good with it, April, I would just love to jump right into some of those challenges.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, I think that, in some of these situations, people who become the primary caregiver feel like maybe there's no one else in the family that can take on this role. Maybe they're not capable of taking it on. Maybe they're refusing, or kind of like you and me, we work in the industry. So people kind of look to us, they default to us for answers, or they're kind of looking to us to jump into that role. And that can really be a challenge if you feel like, gosh, really, this is all on my shoulders. It's all up to me. That can be a huge weight to bear. April, would you find that is to be true for a lot of the caregivers you interact with?
Yeah. And, I honestly don't know how many people really identify as being a caregiver.
Yeah. We talked about that in an early episode.
We say primary caregiver. We say secondary caregiver. What the heck does that mean? Even my Aunt Barbara, who a year ago lost her husband to dementia, she never considered herself a caregiver. Yeah. But she did everything from bathing, dressing, feeding, everything that he needed, but she did not consider herself a caregiver. So I think we just kind of assume the responsibilities that are in front of us, and we don't always consider it a responsibility or a role, and again, if you're not really living and breathing aging, you're just managing, right? And I think about that in terms of my aunt's son. He lived very close by. I live about an hour away. So it's much more of a challenge for me to get there. He's very close by, but, he kind of looks at the tasks of caregiving as, yes, she has food. Yes, she has a place to live. And not so much the nuances that I look at in terms of, how is she thriving? Does she feel alone? And she gave up her driver's license probably about a year and a half ago, and that really changed everything for her. And I don't know that everybody understands sometimes the impact that things like that can have on an aging adult's mindset and their life.
Well, yeah. And giving up driving, we talk about this a lot. It's associated with independence for a lot of folks. And then they become then more dependent on those in their lives to get where they need to go and to provide that type of transportation. And so, yeah, those kind of big changes in a person's life, giving up driving, maybe making a move from home to a community.
Right. Which she did also last year. Actually, we had to move her while she was in the hospital because she had already signed a lease. And we didn't know what was going to happen. And her current living situation where she moved from was unsafe. Had stairs that were just massive. So when she finally kind of woke up, because through the delirium, she didn't remember a lot. All of a sudden, she's in a new home. She doesn't have a car. Somebody else had packed up all her things, So, I think caregivers may not always understand, how life-altering those things can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the psychological impact, and then it sometimes can manifest physically too. And just in my conversations with you about your Aunt Joy, being in the hospital, making all those moves, it sounded so emotionally draining, but also physically draining. And I think we also don't take that part into account. We just and as caregivers, we're busy, and so we're just on to the next task. But I think it's important to stop and reflect: how is this really impacting the person that we're caring for, and checking in with them about that regularly.
Yeah. And I think that's just the beauty of being somebody who's a, whatever we call it, a secondary caregiver, a trusted advocate, whatever. They can look at the big picture. I think when you are directly responsible for somebody who has, maybe diminished capacities and now can't drive, can't get to the doctors on their own, can't get their groceries, needs more assistance, we're focused on the task. Mm-hmm. We've got to get this done. And that's most important to us as the care provider. But many times what's more important to that person who's receiving the care is just, could you sit and have a meal with me? I mean, I remember delivering some food to my aunt, and I wanted to go home. It was an hour drive. I'd been there all day, got groceries, got food, dropped her off, and she wanted me to eat with her. That was what was important to her. So what? She had food in the cabinet. So what? I had brought her, Cracker Barrel, chicken and biscuits. She wanted somebody to sit. So, you can sort of step out of that everyday urgency of getting things done and just enjoy spending a little time with them and listening.
Yeah. Listening is so important. Well, and I think what's so interesting about when you're caring for a non-immediate relative, sometimes the person receiving the care, they're more open to talk to you. I was talking to a daughter-in-law who's helping to care for her father-in-law, and she said, he'll talk to me about a lot of things he won't even talk to his kids about.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, it's to your benefit to be that non-immediate relative, to just allow a little more space for that person to open up. Sometimes you have to build trust with that person if you're maybe in a not in that immediate family member role, but sometimes it can kind of open up the circle of trust in a way. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I think that, the most important thing really is that you are not trying to fix their situation. You are not trying to solve all their problems. You can't, right? People have the right to make their own decisions, I feel, as they age, unless they are a risk to themselves or there's severe dementia. And so we have to just sort of present options to them. Yeah. For example, Joy was falling quite a bit during all of this. And, so we did get her, a medical alert, and she was open to that because I said, Joy, do you want to be safe? Where would you like to be? What's most important to you? And she did not want to go back to the hospital. She did not want to go to a rehab facility. I said, then, are you willing to do these things so that you can stay safely at home? Are you willing? I'm not telling her what to do. Mm-hmm. You can't tell anybody what to do. And that's the beauty of being that non-direct provider, is you can just sort of talk with them, understand their needs, encourage them, give them choices.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of it. I love how you said you can't fix everything. A lot of times as a caregiver, you have to really prioritize what's most important to the person I'm caring for, what's important to their safety, their well-being, and prioritize and involve that person in the conversation. I love how you phrase that with your Aunt Joy. What are you willing to do to help get you back home and keep you safe? Do you realize the potential consequences? I think that, it's all about the way we say things. Communication is so important in every aspect of our life, in every relationship. I think in caregiving, it's equally important, if not more so. We need to be, having good lines of communication.
Yeah. Well, I think our desire is always to protect. Right?
Yes.
We want to protect. The reason we're so protective and we want them to do what we think is most important or most beneficial to them is because we care so darn much. However, we don't have the authority to make these decisions. And I think if I could give any advice to caregivers, it's like, just don't feel like you have to do this for them. They have to make their own decisions. And the more you allow them to live their life and make decisions for themselves, understanding the consequences and some of the risks about decisions, because it is hard to watch somebody. Maybe they're a diabetic and they're not eating right, or maybe they're still smoking, or in my aunt's case, she was so frail, physically weak after, all of her hospitalizations. She needed to exercise. I said, just going up and down the hallway. So I bought her tickets to Willie Nelson this summer. So I said, well, if you want to go to Willie Nelson, are you going to, you're going to have to get conditioned and ready with your exercise. And so she's on it.
I love that.
But she has to be motivated. So her and I are going to see Willie this summer.
That'll be a blast. I
Yeah,
can't
now
wait to
Willie's
see pictures.
90, so, let's hope he's still healthy.
Oh, well, I love that you brought up, setting goals, understanding things that are important, like for your aunt getting to that Willie Nelson concert, really understanding what is important to that person. A lot of people say, well, I want to stay at home. But, maybe even making some of those more shorter term goals. Okay, this summer, what would you love to accomplish? And then perhaps some of those other things you're trying to get them to do makes more sense because now they're working towards a goal and we can figure out a way to work with them to implement some of those changes. Maybe eating a little healthier or getting up to exercise or, it's really important that you are taking your meds regularly so you're staying out of the hospital so we can get to that Willie Nelson concert. So I think too, we're all motivated by purpose and meaning, and that doesn't go away because we get older. I think it becomes even more important in a lot of ways, shapes, and forms.
And they want to contribute too. So, I'm also, I receive her, right? When she wants to do something for me, I let her do it. Actually I invited her this weekend because her son is going to Washington with his wife. They're going to be gone for a little bit. So she's coming over for a slumber party. She's going to spend the night at my house. And she cleaned houses for a living. And that's what she's really good at. So she wants to wash my windows. I said, well, gosh, okay, if you really want to help and you want to wash my windows, I could say, no, you don't need to do that. But that's important to her. So when she comes over, she wants to wash my windows, go for it. Makes her feel good, makes my windows clean. It's a win-win.
This podcast is brought to you by Home Instead, an honor company. If you find yourself needing extra support as a family caregiver or time away from your caregiving responsibilities, Home Instead can help. Our home care services are delivered by compassionate care professionals and range from personal care, meal preparation, and medication management to Alzheimer's care and hospice support. Visit homeinstead.com to learn more and to find a location near you. You mentioned something earlier that I think is interesting when it comes to kind of these non-immediate relative situations. You said, with something about, the legal side of things, and sometimes that can get tricky, when we talk about like powers of attorney and, financial POAs. And sometimes in these kind of non-immediate family situations, there comes some nuances to that. And I know a while back I did a live chat with an elder law attorney, on, all of the aspects of aging, legal aspects of aging. April, you and I have done a few webinars on this topic. And we'll link to some resources in the show notes on this. But I think for those, again, that are caring for a non-immediate relative, it is important to talk through kind of those kind of more formal aspects of caregiving, making sure that there is a healthcare power of attorney, a financial power of attorney. And then if you are truly, the primary caregiver, talking through those documents, making sure that they're in place so that if something happens, and maybe, the son isn't willing, but you as the niece or cousin are willing that the documents reflect that, because then that could create some complications in your caregiving journey along the way.
Oh, absolutely. And, I know she's got all those ducks in a row, which I'm grateful. And that's where her son comes into play. And again, that's a side where I just sort of stepped aside. So, for example, I can't see her medical records. I can't go into her My Chart and look to see how that doctor's visit went. And so when she tries to articulate to me what happened, what the doctor said, I have to realize that I don't need to go there. I know that, my cousin has that covered because legally I'm not, in that. But planning is essential. And I'm thrilled that she does have all those ducks in a row. On the other flip side, my aunt who lost her husband last year, he didn't even have a will in place. Oh, they've been married for 50 years. No will. Disaster. Absolute disaster. And she's a little bit long distance, so I didn't have the same conversations that I have with my local aunt. And you just hate to see somebody have to go through that. So you do need to plan. And I do find that Joy is wanting to have conversations about end of life. She wants to know. She's starting to give. Her name is Joy. So she has a lot of joy things in her house. So Christmas time, when everything is joy, there's hundreds of things. So she's finding places for that. And it's okay. I think it's important that you allow them to have conversations about the future and their concerns about the future. Because that is on their mind. And I find a lot of times we want to say, oh, don't think about that. You're fine. Nothing's ever going to happen. Well, that doesn't make her feel any better. That might make me feel better. So allow those conversations. Just listen.
Absolutely.
And every time I come home with another joy item.
Now at Christmas, your house will be full of joy.
I'm full of joy. Full of joy.
Love that. Oh, gosh. Well, yeah. So the planning ahead is so, so important. Having all those documents in place, having those conversations. But what we, unfortunately see from time to time is families in conflict because of various caregiving roles, or maybe resentment creeps in because, the local family member is not doing enough according to the long distance caregiver, that sort of thing. And so, no matter the relationship to the care recipient, there can be some larger family dynamics that come into play that can make things more complicated or more challenging. And so navigating through some of that, it can be hard and it can get very messy and sticky.
It is. And you know what? It's just unavoidable. I mean, if you just think about your family on a good day, everyone has dynamics. And when there are, more complex issues going on, like aging relatives, there's always going to be a difference of opinion. Not everybody is going to agree. You see that so many times when somebody is, declining in their health, or they have advanced dementia. Some family members just want to bury their head. They can't acknowledge it. Others want to jump in. That's just how we operate on everything as a family. So don't be surprised by that. I think mediation is a great thing. There are aging life care advocates, those geriatric care managers who do a great job at mediation. If that's a big issue in the family, if it's really causing problems, it can be resolved, but don't be surprised. Just deal with it like you always have on every other family issue.
Mm-hmm. I love the idea of bringing in a mediator or using someone outside the family. That can always be really, really helpful. But we do see, those kind of old habits die hard. We see, maybe one sibling steps up, maybe it's the oldest daughter, maybe one, says, this is more than I can handle. So I think it is important to address those. And we have some resources on our website about kind of solving family conflict and how to approach these challenging conversations. And we'll be sure to link to those in the show notes. And we'll also link to that Aging Life Care Association. April, I know you're really involved with that organization, and they provide great resources. You can bring someone in to help kind of from a geriatric care management standpoint.
Yeah, it's great resources.
Yeah. And what I think is also really interesting from a family dynamic standpoint, April, is we're seeing more blended families. And also we're seeing divorced individuals kind of not get back together in the sense of remarriage, but one of the exes will start to support the other as they get older. I think that those are such interesting family dynamics. Maybe we'll dive into that on another podcast, but we are seeing those types of patterns, and that can be really, really challenging.
Right. We're all caregivers. There's been a lot of discussions about solo aging. I personally don't have any children. I am married now, so I have my spouse, but I don't know that I will have someone in my life as I grow older. And I have friends around me now who are growing older, who are not married, whose children live far away. So we're all really caregivers. And I've seen a lot of my network start to build these relationships with their friends, helping each other. What happens when you have a surgery and there's no one to take care of you? You don't plan for anything, but you also realize at some point you're going to need some help. And to build a network of those around you, whether it's family or friends or neighbors or paid support, is critical, because we're all going to need help at some point.
Yes, Absolutely. Yeah, building that support network. We talk about that throughout this podcast series is, making sure that you have that network of support, because we can't do it alone, nor should we have to do it alone. At the very least, connecting with other caregivers that are going through similar situations can help you feel less alone, but then creating your own personal support network made up of all the people that you just mentioned, April.
Yes.
Yeah.
And understanding, what you need as a care recipient. I know I had a little surgery myself in December. I'm a horrible care recipient. And my husband, quite frankly, is a horrible caregiver. And we've talked about this. He's a lovely man, but not everybody knows what you need, right? He was very much in a protective mode. I'm like, let me do as much as I can for myself. So you know what? Having those conversations is important because what you think is important, somebody else may not, so you have to be clear, what would you need if you needed assistance? For me, it's just support me, be there. Don't hover. I don't want to be hovered over. My husband is having surgery this summer. He's going to want me to hover over him. I already know that. So I'm prepared. But it just, you have to put those expectations and those thoughts out there.
Yes, it's good that you're getting these trial runs in now.
We are
just little
practicing.
Short caregiving stints.
That's right.
I know there's been short stints where I've cared for some of my relatives, and it is so interesting to step into that role, even for a short period of time. It really helps you to understand what caregivers are going through, and often for many months, years, and some even decades. And so caregiving, it does take so many different shapes and forms. There's so many different relationships, but I think something we have to remember is most of the time we're in it for the long haul. And so we need to pace ourselves. We need to create a community. We need to take time for ourselves so that we don't reach that burnout, because the care that caregivers provide, whether or not they identify as a caregiver, it's so important to the person they're caring for.
Right. And communication, just keeping those lines open before there's issues, before there's problems. Just keep talking. Keep helping, keep smiling. We talk about this at the caregiver support groups, Lakelyn, that you and I host. It's like that, just the energy that you put out, whether you're tense or you're stressed or you're loving and you're patient, everybody picks up on that. So just take a deep breath.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the emotions of caregiving, I find, it to be interesting, what the research says about the emotional sides of caregiving and the emotional burden. And I was actually reading an interesting study on the quality of life of caregivers based on relationship type. And so since this is a series on the various relationship types, I thought that it would be interesting to just bring up a few of the points from this particular study. And we'll link to it in the show notes if you want to read the full study. But they separated out adult children and spouses. And then they had this big other category that was, siblings, friends, kind of these non-immediate family members. And they found that this other category, they had lower odds of experiencing negative emotional burden than the spousal caregivers. And they were also about 51% less likely to experience social strain than spousal caregivers. And then the last interesting point was they had lower odds of experiencing negative emotional burdens. And this was especially true if there's multiple caregivers involved. So what I kind of took away from this study, April, and be interested to get your thoughts is, if you're caring for a non-immediate relative, because maybe there is that little bit of space between you and that person in your relationship, there might not be as much emotional burden or strain as there would be if you're caring for a spouse or a parent. So I found that to be really interesting. So any thoughts from you, April, on maybe what could be causing this difference?
Well, I think, when you think about a spouse, if you're really a hands-on caregiver for your spouse and you're doing, you're helping them with the most intimate needs, personal needs, it does change. And it would be hard, to observe, your spouse changing. And I think sometimes it's frustrating. In talking with caregivers, I feel like I hear that a lot. They want so hard to make this all better, to control it, to fix it, to improve it. And that's a lot of responsibility, a lot of burden. And it's frustrating when the care recipient does not want to comply because we're just so concerned, but we have to understand, why are they feeling this way?
Yeah.
It's like, well, my dignity is diminished, or I feel like I can't take care of you and I'm the provider. There's so many reasons when it's that intimate. When it's your family or your parents, and you're looking at them changing and declining, and you feel so you're just so close and intimate to it. And I think it just comes down to it's such a huge responsibility, and they want to get it right. And it's frustrating because you can't control.
Yeah.
You can't control everything.
Yes. So often we want to control, but there's so much of caregiving. We just kind of have to let go of that control. Yeah.
And some things I think that, I think caregivers can often, their own agenda becomes most important, where they think, oh, well, this is how it's got to be. And it's like, maybe that's not the best approach. Sometimes you have to just step back and say, all right, how important is this? Is this important to me, or is it important to them? Mm-hmm. And understand the difference and when to compromise. Yeah,
that's a great point.
I love compromise.
Yes. Well, and you bring up such a great point about kind of the intimacy of the relationship and, the spousal caregiving role. Obviously, often they're living together, possibly still. And so that could be, another reason why it's so much more emotion involved, so much more social strain, because maybe they're spending all their time caregiving. And then you think of that adult child who's that relationship dynamic is changing. They're going from being the child to maybe having the feeling of like, oh, now I'm parenting my parent. And that can be very emotionally straining. Right. But maybe if you're caring for an aunt or a cousin or a neighbor, you still maybe have a similar relationship dynamic, but maybe you're just helping out a little bit more. And so perhaps for some folks, I know this is not, maybe consistent across the board, but that might be a reason why maybe the emotional side of it, they can create more of those kind of emotional boundaries and kind of separate themselves a little bit just because of the nature of the relationship.
Yeah. And I think there's guilt. There's all kinds of emotions. And, Lakelyn, you and I talk about this a lot, because I have to remind sometimes everyone that when you're caregiving for someone, you may not have a great relationship with them. Yeah. Especially with aging parents. I had challenges with my own mother. She was a tough woman. And as she got older, it wasn't any easier. So it was a complicated relationship that we had. And sometimes, parents aren't always the greatest. Spouses aren't always the best. And then we're in a position where we have to care for them. Yeah. And that can really make things complicated. Just be aware sometimes that it's okay. You're doing the right thing, but there's also those emotional aspects can't be ignored. That relationship has existed for many, many years. And in many respects, it probably hasn't changed. Now the roles are just different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another reason why it's so important to plug into the resources that you have within your community, within the greater caregiving community, because having to go through all of that alone, again, can be so isolating. So connecting to resources like this podcast, listening to people's caregiving stories and these tips, knowing you're not alone, joining a support group. April, you and I, we facilitate the most incredible support group. I'm always so humbled by all that these caregivers share. And you can just see, the connections being made and the light bulbs going off when they're together and they're sharing. And so, as caregivers, it's important to lean into those resources. And on episode 3 of the Caregiver Chats podcast, we actually talked about, 10 resources every family caregiver should know. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I would encourage you to do so. But especially if you're a non-immediate, relative or family member to the person you're caring for, some key, resources I would direct you to first and foremost is the Area Agency on Aging. If you haven't connected locally with them, they might be able to help you find resources and support for the person you're caring for. A lot of them have those Meals on Wheels programs because we know nutrition is a big factor, and a lot of times maybe you can't always get over there to cook a meal. And then, of course, home care. April and I work at Home Instead, and
transportation.
Yeah, transportation. Absolutely.
Yeah,
what other resources would you add to that?
Yeah, I know that, there some communities through their area agency have some amazing resources. It's quite incredible. Meals on Wheels, my aunt did not like that, but that's okay. We found other options, but we use the transportation a lot. She has come to navigate that quite well. Recreation, they are now back to doing some programs, and she's hoping to get on a bus and go somewhere with some of those folks. So I think that's important. And I think just another resource to tap into as often as you can is laughter.
Oh, yes.
When we, the caregivers on our support group, when they share stories that are just, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry.
Right.
So sometimes you just have to lighten up and say, wow, is this hysterical? Because you can't make some of this stuff up. And it's okay every once in a while just to let loose and laugh.
Yes. Laughter is the best medicine, they say.
It is.
Yes.
Never fails.
Yes. In caregiving, sometimes you do have to just take a moment and laugh, but also to find joy in some of the caregiving that you're doing. I hear so many caregivers say, caregiving is the hardest thing I've ever done, but I also wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Yeah. I've gained a lot from this caregiving journey. And so sometimes, reflecting on, the positive side of caregiving, maybe that the gratitude or things that you're thankful for, or focusing on, okay, what was the one thing that went right today, can help sustain you along that caregiving journey.
And to be able to put a smile on someone's face and make them feel loved. Oh my goodness. When I pick up Joy, I try to at least once a month, because it's, it's a bit of a drive for me. So I will spend the day with her. And it always involves food and shopping, and lots of adventures. And it just brings me so much joy to see her so excited, to spend the day with me. And that, that makes me feel pretty darn good. It's good for my health too. And I think when you recognize, like I said, she's going to be 80. How much longer will I have her in my life? I don't know, but I'm going to maximize the time that I have and spend with her as much as I can.
That's beautiful. Well, April, you and I could talk all day about this. So for the sake of everyone else's time, we'll wrap it up here. But I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your personal caregiving journey of supporting your Aunt Joy, for all of the tips and insights that you have helped us glean today. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else listening has also learned a lot.
Thank you, Lakelyn.
I hope you have found this 3-part series on caregiving relationships to be helpful. I invite you to join me for our next episode, where I talk about the sandwich generation, those who are sandwiched in between caring for an aging parent and caring for their own children. At times, this generation is feeling the pressures on both sides, making them feel more like a squished panini sandwich. Tune in next time to learn more. I want to hear from you about your caregiving experiences and tips. Email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's homeinsteadinc.com. I invite you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Home Instead Inc. Again, that's Home Instead INC for previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. You can find all the links in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com/caregiverchats to learn more.